Hi everyone, thanks so much for taking the time and interest to watch my presentation here. But before we start, I must sincerely apologise for the lack of support and resources available to me at the time to record this presentation. As you will see, I only captured one camera angle for the entire 2-hour presentation. As static as this will appear over this length of time to watch, I just hope that my insights and knowledge shared with you all here will make up for that limitation and keep you interested enough to watch further to the concluding feature film. In the end, however, it is the knowledge and insights conveyed that count the most importantly for those who need it most of all. So again, my apologies in advance, and I hope you still like the presentation anyway. Thank you. Hi everyone, thanks for coming, and I just want to say a big thank you to Natasha, who runs the services department here at the uni, and for organising this. My name is Spencer, and I have successfully recovered from schizophrenia psychosis. And for many years now, I have lived symptom-free and side-effect-free from any relapse or trace of the illness. Okay. My presentation tonight will focus on recovery and my personal insights and ethical, humane perspectives regarding psychosis and mental health in general. My speech is also rather stern at times in addressing the current environment of the mental health system's modern perspectives, so please be prepared for that as well. To conclude on a more hopeful and inspiring note, I will take time to carefully explain my devoted area of interest, the rather controversial subject of the long-enduring relationship between psychosis and mystical experiences in human life. But firstly, how psychosis began for me, occurred for me. I encountered my first psychotic episode of schizophrenia at the age of 20, which started around Christmas time of 1992, after falling in love with my college sweetheart, who at this holiday time treated me very unkindly, uncaringly, and rather cruelly psychologically. I was hospitalised on the night of New Year's Eve at Pindara Private Hospital in Queensland, as I was visiting my dad on Sherman Island and was hoping to meet up with Anne and friends for New Year's celebrations on holiday there on the Gold Coast. This first initial episode lasted about 3 weeks. Even though I had no idea what I was suffering from, I knew something was seriously wrong with me at the time. That much was profoundly obvious to me, and I certainly didn't have to rely on any qualified diagnosis to tell me that. It took about 2 months to recover from this initial episode, after which I heavily suffered from depression until full recovery back to my normal, usual self later that year around August, September 1993. I was still very sad that I was diagnosed with schizophrenia though. Life for me would never be the same. Who would ever want to be with a schizo nutter, I thought. Since that initial experience, I've encountered a further 5 very fleeting but very extremely intense episodes of psychosis, lasting about 40 days for each, until returning back to my normal stable self again. For each encounter with psychosis, I've always successfully and fully recovered back to my usual, regular, normal self again, free from lingering symptoms or any medicated side effects. It is important to note that my experiences of psychosis were not triggered by any use of drugs, as I've never been influenced by such. Rather, for me, my episodes were triggered by my very natural and sensitised disposition of not being able to cope with specific environmental traumas such as psychological cruelty and adolescent bullying inflicted upon me from unkind others at that time in my early teenage years and early adulthood. And in this respect, I would have to say that psychological cruelty and mistreatment are the #1 issues in human life for encountering psychosis and other related mental illnesses and traumas, both environmentally caused and genetically cumulative over time and heredity. And in this greater accountable way, responsibility for psychological illnesses experienced in life is far more accountable upon the initiator rather than the afflicted. If only society and the mental health industry in general would truly admit to that fact of cruel psychological human behaviour in general, we would not be so much accused and shunned as the delusional and dangerous ones, totally responsible for our own circumstances. So that's the introduction, and we'll move on to the segments of the speech now. We have part one, which is the wrongness of illness labelling. Even though I have won the horrific battle to return to my normal self again, and the illness of schizophrenia and psychosis itself is no longer part of my life at present, the most frustrating, humiliating and demoralising aspect I find is people like myself, even long after recovery, are still categorised and labelled as a schizophrenic, not only by society and media in general, but also being addressed as such by doctors, scientists, psychiatrists and professionals in the industry. This is extremely inaccurate, and I'll explain why. Health and well-being is the natural state to be. Illness and discord prevents us from keeping that natural state of being, and therefore any illness, no matter what it may be, is something we are not essentially. We all strive for and want health and harmony. No one strives for illness, discord and violation. Why? Because health and well-being is our natural and comfortable state of function. Even when I was sick, even the very first time, it was extremely disturbing and profoundly obvious to me that something was seriously wrong. And as I said, I certainly didn't have to rely on any qualified diagnosis to tell me that. I was very much aware of that for myself. If we are fortunate, we may suffer from illness for a short duration and recover. If we are unfortunate, we may suffer for a long duration and may never recover. But no matter what length of time it is upon us, we are not that illness essentially, because it is not a natural state of health. You never hear someone who is diagnosed with cancer being called a cancer. They are addressed as having cancer or suffering from cancer. A person is not a Parkinson's disease, they suffer from Parkinson's disease. Keeping this in mind, there are many other illnesses that we label and categorise people as. Take diabetes. It would be far more accurate to say they have diabetes or they suffer from diabetes, rather than address them as a diabetic. Although not an illness, a person with drinking problems is not an alcoholic. They simply suffer from alcohol debilitation, with the salesman from normal regular health. I've met many people who do have suffered from schizophrenia, but never in all my life have I ever come across a schizophrenic. This is a very sensitive and very large issue that needs to be addressed, because for those of us who have struggled with mental illness and now live normal, regular lives, being categorised as a schizophrenic, as opposed to being labelled as a diabetic, can be very offensive and degrading to who we truly are. As the Hollywood actor William H. Macy once advocated, see the person, not the illness. So the summary quote for this part one is, schizophrenia is an illness, not a person. There is no such thing as a schizophrenia. So we'll move on to part two, which is the difference between recovered and cured. Before I continue, I would just like to make it clear that using the word recovery does not imply cured from the illness. Cured implies that the illness is totally devoid, is now and for always after totally devoid of your individual system and will never return upon you again. I have not and will never state that here or in any of my work. What I do vouch for, though, as being the proof of that, I will absolutely state beyond all doubt that it is totally possible for individuals who encounter this horrific illness can make a full and successful lasting recovery from it back to normal, regular health and function, just as they were before the illness ever came upon them. And provided they conduct themselves accordingly, a person may prevent the illness from ever striking back again with further ongoing relapses. As much as society is misled to believe that recovery from extreme mental traumas like psychosis is not at all possible, my life experience is a continuing example and living testimony that recovery from psychosis is a very real reality. As someone who has lived extensively free from permanent symptoms of psychosis and medicated side effects for a long time now, I will always advocate that full and lasting recovery from the nightmare of psychosis is a very real reality, back to your normal health again, just as it was before the illness ever came upon you. For me, as much as I am very well aware of the early warning signs, when I do encounter a relapse, I involuntarily and unavoidably go into deep episodes very quickly and come back out of them just as quick and cleanly, back to my regular stable health again. All in all, so far of my 6 episodes of about 40 days for each, I have experienced a total of about 240 days of psychosis in my life so far. So does that make me a schizophrenic in essence, or just a person who has encountered very fleeting episodes of psychosis, as intense as they have been? Humanely and ethically, for all our dignity to go through the horrors of it, I vouch for the latter as being far more accurate and true. Though extremely fortunately for me, the illness has never been so prolonged long enough to overtake or distort my natural and original character, as very sadly is the case with so many. This has been my personal and direct experience of psychosis, and as stable and as well as I have been, apart from those brief, intense episodes in my life, I will always advocate that very real hope for others. This is my continuing life testament, and as much as society is misled to believe otherwise about recovery and our so-called delusion of thinking to be so, I will always advocate that very real possibility of full and lasting recovery for the hope and inspiration of others. And to state the obvious, just in case you missed it, this is what all mental health practitioners and psychiatrists hope to achieve for all their clients: long-lasting recovery, free from ongoing symptoms and side effects. That is their primary job of practice. However, having said all that, it is no 100% guarantee that I will never encounter another relapse again in my life. But however, from everything I've gone through my 20 years of experience, I now have substantial tools and armour to prevent such again, and I will do everything in my good power to continue to do so. From what I've come to realise, psychological illnesses can either go 2 main ways for us, either into a continuing vicious cycle of ongoing symptoms of trauma and side effects, or in the more positive and hopeful way of successful and lasting recovery, from which we may come to further understand ourselves and reality in a bigger, better and brighter light. As my good friend Bill Guy of Schizophrenic Fellowship's Recovery Services has most accurately coined, from recovery to discovery. And this very much speaks to my life experience after the illness. So the summary quote for part 2 is, recovery is a very real reality. Cured is not as yet. So we'll move on to part 3 and then we'll take questions for a couple of minutes and we'll just see what comes up then. So part 3, the social prejudice with brain medications concerning recovery and lasting stability. Although I rely on a small dose of medication to help assist in sustaining normal regular health, I no longer have any symptoms or side effects associated with the illness: paranoia, delusions, hallucinations, disjointed body and facial expression, mumble distorted speech, limited irregular eye motion, or lack of concentration. Regarding medication, I would like to dispel here and now a certain demoralising prejudice about such concerning stability and recovery. Many people take certain medicine to help sustain normal health. Even having a regular dosage of exercise assists in keeping normal regular health. Regardless of whatever medium, physical and or medicated, just about every single human being who can partakes in a certain practice that assists in keeping normal regular health. And therefore, whatever medium sorted, physical and or medicated, it should not be judged in a prejudiced, unfair light when it comes to the actuality of recovery and lasting stability. Since both do exactly the same job and the same outcome is desired from both, normal regular health. So, the summary quote for part 3 is, when it comes to recovery, brain medication is no different from any other medications or vitamins we use to keep ourselves fit, healthy and regular. Okay, does anybody have any questions so far? Bill?
Thank you, Spencer. Thank
That's
you.
right.
Wonderful so far.
Thanks.
It's an interesting sorry. It's an interesting period, the 40 days that you actually have, because as you know very well, it's a very period that's quite well spoken about in a number of logistics. 40 days and 40 nights.
Yeah.
40
I think,
days.
I think there is some sort of subconscious association for that period as well. Yeah.
Why? And I'm wondering, obviously, as you said before, there's been some fairly, usually traumatic triggers that seem to have preceded the onset of the psychosis and the psychotic episode. And then you've had that period of 40 days. Was there anything that happened in the 40 days that, in a sense, hastened the recovery? Because some people don't come out of that. Some people it's a little bit shorter.
Yeah,
what do you think helps?
I think it's just my personal disposition of having a good, strong will to overcome.
Yeah.
And also I'd say that I think there was a natural process of the psychosis period. There was a starting process, a mid-process, and a finishing process. And it just seemed to wean itself as well. Of course I was taking medication, and luckily I don't think I was too over-medicated during my times. And it's just very strange that each episode that I've had has lasted about a month and a half, almost 40 days.
Like a journey.
And the last 2 episodes have not been so scary as the last ones before that, but they were more overwhelming, a rush. But in the early stages, before I really went into the deep stages, it was very, very profound and very, very, you could say, not more mystical than psychotic features, because I felt very elate, very acute and very alert, even though I hadn't slept for a while. But there came a point where my subconscious state was conflicting with my awake state, and that could get a bit confusing. But overall, for me, the psychosis just seems to wean itself out after that period, and I do come out of it very cleanly and back to my usual regular self again.
So maybe just one more supplementary question. And because anxiety, in a sense, is one thing, and the psychotic episode is another. Do you think this is a hypothesis, that what you're learning is to separate out the anxiety so you're not quite as anxious? Because when you've got the psychotic episode, the anxiety together, that really is very compounded.
The anxiety seems to be an aftershot of the psychosis, because the psychosis is so overwhelming, and it makes you very scared and anxious.
So it could be, as you get more mature, in a sense, you're learning to keep your anxiety down, in which case the actual episode is not such a scary thing.
And that's what they say in the relationship. The only difference between the psychotic and the mystic is that the mystic is mastered to control the episodes, whereas the person who's immature and not that equipped can't cope with it because it's too much all at once. That's right. Any other questions, Jordan?
Thanks very much. Nice introduction. To what extent would you say or make a comment on the idea that crosses my mind that all of us in the human condition suffer from
type?
Suffer from a neurosis of separation.
Oh, well, I think that's part of the human condition, because having an ego, I think that's essential, vital, because without our sense of separation or displacement from others, you would have no relationship. It would just be all the one balanced consciousness operating through everything with no individual reference to this, that, everything else. So I think that, having that displacement of me here and that there, that if you call that, I don't know if that would be called neurosis, but I think it is a very vital function of individuality that is needed for relationship between everything else, because otherwise it would just be all the one thing. But as far as neurosis in a medical sense, I would say that we all probably do have it to degrees in life, and some people have it more extreme than others, because I'm sure we all have our difficulties at times. Because, let's face it, Buddha's first law says life is difficult. The next 4 laws are getting over that. So, life in general is quite difficult for most of us, and that can cause trauma, and it may result in a neurotic way or neurosis way. Yeah. Any other questions?
Do you remember not everything, but do you remember, behaviours and stuff that were happening?
My last 2 episodes I do very much.
What about the ones when you were younger?
The only one that I don't remember, there's only one that I don't remember, and that was because they gave me ECT, which knocked out my memory at the time. But all my other episodes, if I had to write a journal, I could do it. I could write about what I experienced during that time. Because I know for a lot of people that trauma knocks it out of their memory. And I don't understand, I don't know, I appreciate that, but I don't understand why that is, because it's something that has happened, and there should be some sort of memory association. So, because for me, I could, if I tried hard enough, because my earlier ones are further away in time, they would be harder to remember. But my last 2 episodes, I could very much document week to week what happened.
And were the symbols of it, occurring and it happening, was it similar every time? Or do you
The last 2 were very similar, but it was mainly to do with light and shade, and I went into a subconscious body emotions, and in that moment it was very specific. But if you ask me now why I was doing it, I have no idea. So
it's different every
time. Because I think the doctor was saying, look, he's going into the movements again, because what I would do, I'd go into the movements and then I'd come back to a prayer position, and when I finished that, I'd go off again. I'd come back, and then I'd go off again. But the thing is, it's a very good way to keep fit. And what I did after I recovered, I wrote an exercise book called Yogi Motion, and it's based on the body motions that I did in relation to all that. So it was and that wasn't scary. That wasn't scary for me. It was just very intense and very focused. But there was no negativity associated with it. I was mainly trying to move light into dark areas, and the sunlight into dark areas, using my arms and stuff. But if you ask me now why I was doing it, I have no idea. But when I was in it, in the subconscious state, it was very specific.
It kind of looks like a bit of Tai Chi.
It was. It was like that.
It's very centering, isn't it?
Maybe I just went into a subconscious yogi state or something. I don't know. And someone actually told me recently that that's how yogi might have actually originally started, because people used to go into subconscious movements, and they have no idea why it was. And so the masters used to say that they would try to work out why they would do that, and that's how they believe yoga essentially started, because people would go into these spontaneous movements, and they just developed from that.
So just on that, were you trying to keep light and dark?
Yes, balance. No, balance. But I was mainly trying to put light into dark.
Yes.
Yes.
Well, that was my thought, that you weren't trying to darken the light.
No, I was doing the reverse. I was trying to put light into dark. Yeah, but see,
relate to that.
now the strange thing is why did I go into doing that so quickly and directly with no reference? What was the reason why I was doing that? That's the strange thing which I can't work out.
And was it during all the...
The last two
The
mainly,
last two.
but very much in the last episode.
Well, can I make a suggestion?
Yeah.
I think it would be an act of will.
Yeah.
Okay, you have to watch my words, but they're clear. I think it'd be an act of will in the sense that part of you is right out of the right out of the involvement with the episode. You know, sealed away from it, and yet it's still you. And I can make sense of the idea that it's a, I don't like the word defence mechanism. It's greater than that. It's actually a given natural balancing mechanism.
Yeah, the word that comes to mind for me is cleansing.
Yeah.
Cleansing,
Yeah.
a cleansing.
Yeah.
Not just for me personally, but for stuff around me immediately as well.
Yeah.
But as I say, then you ask the question, do you think it works or not? And that's anybody's guess, you know. If you're a spiritual person, you could say maybe, but if you're an atheist, you'd say you're just delusional. But who knows? Okay. Okay. Yep.
Just quickly. With the first episodes of Psychosis and the last two, which you referred to as more mystical perhaps, or you had perhaps a greater, you're in touch with yourself, I guess, sort of in relation to it. And again, they might not be the right words.
Yeah.
How did you know you were almost, and I could use lots of words for semantics, but how did you know you were falling back into the cycle of psychosis?
Yeah, I can very much.
And how different was it with your first couple of episodes as opposed to the last two? What was the sense that was different? Firstly, how did it feel? And secondly, what was the differences?
The first time,
How does it feel emotionally, spiritually?
Emotionally, the first time I had it, it was very scary because I had no idea what was going on. And I went into a catatonic state, but it wasn't because my brain was dull or numbed. It was because there was so much happening and so much I was referring to and so much ideas that I had of what I was experiencing that it was just completely overwhelming. And because I was so scared by what I was conjuring up in my mind, I was so scared to do anything that I just went totally still in myself. And the catatonic wasn't involuntary stillness. I chose that stillness for my own self to not do anything because I was so scared. So the first time it was very scary and overwhelming, and I knew something was wrong immediately. Whereas as the episodes progressed over time, I could tell the warning signs of when they were happening, even within the first.
So what's a warning sign for you?
I see someone walking past the street and they look at me and I think it's relating to me. When it's not really relating to me, and carnal plates relating to me, things like that. And if that starts to become excessive, I know there's symptoms starting to happen. But within the very first time it happens, I know. But sometimes I'm a bit guilty, and I just check to make sure is it really happening or not. So I let it go for a little bit, and then sometimes I leave it for about a week just to see. And the week period, in that period, if I know something's happening, then I'll do something about it.
And what's that usually?
That was with the next 3 or 4 episodes.
Okay.
But after my first 2 episodes, I had my 3 mystical experiences, and I think they have also influenced my later experiences as well, especially my last 2, and because of that opening. And but now in the early stages, they were scary, but now they're more intense and profound and very, very insightful in a way.
Can you write during those times?
Yeah. I should do actually. I should. I'll make a promise that if I ever have another relapse, I'll do a daily journal.
Yeah.
Didn't you draw a picture or something?
Yeah, I did some doodles and stuff. It was mainly subconscious. It wasn't specific stuff. It was just Anthony.
Are you on a maintenance dose of medication?
Yeah.
And the relapse will happen in spite of your regularly taking the
That
medication?
depends.
Or is it because you're going off the
It
medication?
depends, because I have been off my medication and been okay, because I travelled around Europe and I ran out of my medication and I was fine for a whole month, but I got back home and I had traumatic episodes, moments, and I started to have, I didn't relapse fully, but I was a little bit paranoid, and then I got back and saw my doctor. So it can go both ways. I can be off it and be okay, but I've been on it and I've relapsed as well.
Really?
Yeah, but I have been off it and relapsed as well. So it's very, I think it depends very much on the situation you're in, if it'll stress you up to manifest the symptoms. And
So the trigger is internal or external or both?
both ways. Yeah.
It's probably a combination.
Because it can be an environmental thing, and you respond to it.
Yeah.
Or you could just be having an off day and feeling lousy and stuff, and you can get depressed or whatever, and that can make you anxious, and that can set you off. But for me, mainly it's external stuff that I respond to. And usually, as I said to somebody, it's usually to do with if my integrity is compromised, my self-worth is compromised, that seems to make me feel very vulnerable and exposed, and that seems to be the number one thing for me that will make me relapse. If I feel someone out there has compromised my integrity or self-worth or humiliated me in some sort of unfair way, that can also have very reactive consequences as far as stress is concerned.
In some ways, it can be something like somebody who suffers occasionally from asthma. Sometimes you can get a series of triggers that will mount up. So you're having a bad day. Also, for some people, it might be certain foods that you shouldn't have eaten, but were just on their own wouldn't have done anything. But that plus the stress, psychological stress, of course, particularly when it affects yourself. Then that's a very big one for a lot of people there. And you get the accumulation of those, and it's like a stack of straws. And the last one comes on the straw. That's the last straw.
That's what I think how it happened to me the first time. I was having a lot of difficulty at school with bullying and stuff. And then I came to my really psychological nasty stuff with my first girlfriend, she wasn't my girlfriend, but I loved her, and she knew it. And she just used that to her advantage. And that whole period leading up to that, I think that was just the thing at the time that set me over the edge. That was the one that did it for me, and so that's what happened for me. Right, I think we're going to move on. Right. So thanks for the questions, guys. That was good. Okay, part 4. Using the word normal. You may have noticed my deliberate use of the word normal in my dialogue so far. I've done this as it doesn't cease to amaze me that mainstream society still asks the question, so what is normal anyway? Well, having encountered insanity and having returned to sanity to once again register reality as it actually is, I certainly understand and appreciate the very accurate definition and grammatical term of the word normal, far beyond the appreciation of any normal person who takes that privilege of health and stability for granted and knows no different from having normal, regular health. Being normal means you are a healthy individual. You are well and stable in mind. This does not mean your personal likes, dislikes or idiosyncrasies. No. These are your unique traits of personality. Normal refers to the general picture. It means being healthy and well and having a stable disposition of mind. But always remember, normality is always measured according to reasonable social standards of successful function and acceptance in general at the current time of progress and development. Who knows what the standard of normal will be in 500 years from now? Something far more ethical, kind, compassionate, and humanely equal, I deeply hope. So the summary quote for part 4 is, quite simply, normal means being healthy, stable and well. That's it. Okay, part 5. Stigma and prejudice, both inside and outside of the mental health system. As if our experiences, episodes of psychosis, etc. in our life are not immensely trying and traumatic enough, in many sad ways far longer and further upon us in life is society's continuing blind, ignorant stigma, prejudice and contempt towards us, which hits extremely hard indeed and lasts for a great deal longer than the episodes of mental illness itself. Very sadly, not only is there prejudice and stigma out there in society at large, but also very critically so, it is still very much alive and well, both directly and indirectly, in the very industry that is supposed to support, care and endorse us. And speaking personally, ever since I took up advocacy over 10 years ago now, I've had to deal with that very bad preconceived hypocrisy most very directly over the years, particularly more so for someone like myself who advocates the holistic and transpersonal perspectives to mental health, recovery and well-being. Not only is society's stigma and prejudice a complete unjust and offensive kick in the teeth to us, but also very much from the mental health industry as well, or rather maybe under, stems so much in habitual, educated, preconceived and prejudiced knowledge about and upon us. Quite simply and humanly speaking, if we cannot be accepted and given a fair go by the very industry that's supposed to rightly care and support us, then what remote chance do we ever have of being accepted and given a fair go out there in society at large? For honestly and truly, if anyone does achieve long-term and lasting recovery from the nightmare of psychosis and mental illness, surely in all good reason and common sense, the industry would greatly endorse and encourage them. Certainly not doubt and question them by further contempt and questioning, by turning their backs on them in denial. What is truly sad about all this is that some of us, like myself, are living proof of the very ideal they all hope and long for, lasting recovery. And what happens when that is truly achieved? They are very much resentful, contemptuous about it when it is actually achieved long term. It is very sad indeed. And stating the obvious, this is nothing more than blatant contempt and hypocrisy in the highest extreme that wants that. From my experience, as soon as you take the very brave and bold risk to disclose or even mention the dreaded S word of schizophrenia to anyone, even if you are recovered or not, people's perspective and attitude, or rather reaction, immediately towards you goes south in an instant. And all your good hard works are turned completely upside down, inside out, not taken for granted in their true merit for what they are, and continually questioned and put under complete unfair, unjust, judgmental scrutiny in the wrong way. It is no wonder with such extreme demoralising, contemptuous reactions to us from both sides that it takes a very real miracle if we ever get the real, decent and deserved chance to lead a regular, accepted and lasting, dignified and normal life in respected equality as all else. If you think life is difficult for you in general, then just try living in our shoes for a couple of weeks and see how well you cope with all that stigma, prejudice and hypocrisy as an extra on top of that. Okay, so the summary quote is, in many sad ways, humanity's stigma and prejudice upon us is far more worse and damaging long term than the symptoms of mental illness itself. Part 6.
Can I make a comment?
Yeah, sure.
I can well imagine, I don't know, but I can well imagine that the mental health industry is inept, basically. Okay? It's probably...
They're learning too.
Okay.
They're learning too.
It's probably got very genuine people in it, and it's probably got people who think they know everything.
But they started in a very bad way. since the Industrial Revolution, psychiatry started in a very bad, inhumane way.
I think any organisation, any structure in society, the classic one, I think, is politics, which gets really bad media, and I don't want to go into politics, but it gets bad media, they stuff up in, right, left and centre, and I can imagine that the same applies, it certainly applies in religion, I know that, it certainly applies in all organisations, universities, where there's this sort of imperfection, which just mishandles the idea.
The sad thing is that we don't have the answers. The human being is always searching for the answers. That's the nature of the human mind. And but I just think if the industry was truly honest with themselves, they're really like babes in the woods. They really there's more mystery about the mind and the brain than what there isn't. They're only scratching the tip of the iceberg, if that, at the moment. So, and it's very sad. It's we that suffer for it, and that's the sad thing. And you do get a lot. Not a lot, but there are some in the industry who do have that. I'm here and you're there attitude, and they treat it like a piece of meat. I mean, I just had that yesterday at the medical centre with a doctor, and that was not even with mental illness. It's only because I disclosed that he went a bit difficult with me. And that's, they can't take it at face value, which of course sometimes you can't with mental illness because some people can sometimes put on a very good front and hide what's going on inside. It would be nice if the industry would not think they have all the answers, because they don't. And there is more unknown than what is known about all this area.
Absolutely.
I think they make it up too black and white. I don't think they see it as right or wrong or yes or no. I don't think they, like you said, they're really scratching the surface of looking at it.
Because I think there are actual answers to life, but until we get those definitive answers, we are all still searching. Like, okay, we can say the world's round, that's been discovered, we've taken a photo of the Earth from outside, and we can see how it is. So that knowledge applies to all of us equally. That's a standard that is universal to all of us. And until we get to those standards in life, we will always be questioning and searching and asking and trying to find the answers. And it's only when we find the answers that we will have cures and remedies and stuff. But until that time comes, we will still be questioning and re-evaluating, and time after time, age after age, adjusting the knowledge that we learn until we find the actual things about reality. Any other questions? Oh, sorry, this is not question time, we're supposed to be moving on. We're not going to have time here, we're going to keep going. Alright, part 6, the early inaccurate days of the industry's research perspectives on genetic predisposition. In case you have not noticed it yet, I do not like the term mental illness. With the way biological and genetic research is heading about the ethical actuality of such in human life, mental illness should be far more accurately and humanely called something like mind sensitivity or mind acuteness, or something along those lines. In the early days of research of what was to be called genetic predisposition, the industry professionals at the time were under the very misdirected, inhumane presumption and misbelief that for every single mental illness there was one specific defective gene target for each of them. As wrong as we now know this to be, in these early days I was actually one of the very first, as an advocate, not a professor or scientist, to very strongly protest against this very inhumane and unethical, somewhat absolutist, degrading theory on genetic predisposition. I intuitively declared early on in the piece that all mental illness symptoms are a result of very elaborate, sensitive, multiple gene characteristics, certainly not one singular illness target, that become overstimulated in specific stressed pathways as a result of various environmental traumas, which can, as a result, not a cause, manifest the appropriate mental symptoms accordingly. And in many long-term circumstances in life, not just one symptom specifically. Some arrogant elitist thinkers in the industry even believe that we were somehow essentially wired differently from the rest of humanity. Like, how inhumane, degrading and prejudiced can these professionals actually get towards us? It is very sad indeed. Not only was my early advocacy on this more accurate, real and true, as was to be later discovered by the industry, and far more humane and ethical to the actuality of brain genetics, but this also meant that we are not genetically defective with diseased genes in us to start with, just waiting for their moment of glory to erupt in us. But rather, they are a result of very elaborate multiple gene characteristics coming together in certain overstimulated and stressed pathways to result in the appropriate symptoms according to the outer circumstances, mostly of a traumatic nature. Quite simply, this means that when we are pushed to extremes, anyone can and may encounter a mental illness in life, not just the sensitive ones. In this way, a mental illness is not embedded in our genes as an absolute target waiting to awake from dormancy when the time is right. No. Mental illness is a chemical reactive result of overstimulated genetic reactions which manifest the symptoms accordingly. Thus, mental illness is a result, not a cause. Even so with the situation of heredity. With regard to labelling people as an illness they suffer from, this was also a great ethical win for us as well. For this meant that any illness we encounter in life is not who we are genetically or even essentially, but rather a reactive experiential circumstance and expression, very much separate from our true deeper self. Essentially speaking, and getting down to the essence of things, this also meant that our essential self of being is just as regular and normal as the so-called sane person. And hence, most importantly, we are just as equal in essence to everyone else as well. For quite simply, no matter how different or separate we may appear at the surface sensory level of relative life, in essence we are all made up of exactly the same stuff of reality. Atoms, photons, energy, and above all, the very same life force of all existence flowing through us all. To use a simple and accurate metaphor, our true deeper self is like the inside of the orange, and the outer skin is the surface expressive outer self of us showing to the world. Whether sick or well, it is only an outward expression of that deeper, truer self experiencing the environment accordingly as witness. Whether in a stressful situation or a harmonious situation, the expressive outer self will respond, react, according to that outer stimulus. But the deeper self of us, our essential being, is always true and constant, and not affected by what impacts upon us at the surface of life. That is why recovery is possible, because our true self is always there behind it all. So the summary quote for part 6 is, genetic predisposition is not our essential nature. Subjectivity, our true self, goes deeper and beyond genetics. Okay, I'll just get part 7 out the way, and then we might have some question time. Part 7. How are we going, guys? Are we still interested?
Yes.
Okay. Part 7. The industry's modern-day inaccurate labelling of genetic vulnerability. Okay. From the early misdirected days of genetic predisposition research was to also come the equally inhumane and offensive mental illness label of genetic vulnerability, now the somewhat standard accepted belief in the industry and psychiatric education system. And so once again, from the truer holistic approach to life and reality, I advocated very much against this as well, arguing that it is far more the case in general of genetic sensitivity, not vulnerability, that is the real heart of the issue concerning mental traumas experienced in life. As my friend Bill Guy keeps assuring me about this more humane and accurate perspective, vulnerability implies it is a liability, whereas sensitivity implies it is more an asset, even if the outcome symptoms do become confused and uncertain about what is truly being experienced at the time. I argued that the true state is of various genes being in a very sensitized state in heightened acute stimulus than the regular due to environmental stresses and traumatic circumstances. To use a simple and accurate analogy, it is like a 60-watt light bulb being plugged into a 60,000 watt socket. In other words, too much information overload too soon to cope with and manage properly and regularly, both inwardly and outwardly. This would also account for such situations of psychosis of a catatonic and zombie-like state. There is too much stimulus for the person's brain to handle, and as a result, the excessive overload sends the brain into emergency shutdown mode. And speaking for all the consumers I've spoken to about this, all have confessed that they are all of a very sensitive nature and disposition. If there truly is such a thing as genetic predisposition, this, I would have to say, is the number one issue for encountering a mental illness if we are faced with stress and trauma in our life: sensitivity. Where the thick-hearted person who is less deep in touch with the gentler side of the human nature will usually just shrug off such things far more quickly and easily, it is the sensitive and caring ones in life who live with the troubles and traumas of the world. In better accurate definition, true sensitivity is not at all about weakness or uselessness, as is so commonly misperceived by society in general, but rather of being caring, compassionate, kind and empathic in nature towards others and the world around us. Ever since my first episode of Psychosis, my original psychiatrist and now good friend initially diagnosed me as hyperconscious. After many years of further experiences, mentally, emotionally and mystically, I now, in hindsight, have come back around all these years later to greatly appreciate the immediate accuracy of his wise early diagnosis of me. In myself, I know very well that it is my very sensitised disposition that makes me highly conscious, acute and receptive to the environment around me and how it impacts and impresses on me. And for this main reason above all, I have to be very careful and overcautious to avoid stress and trauma immediately around me if I am to safely avoid further relapses of psychosis. And it's really a bit of a catch-22 because, let's face it, the work environment is not really the best for a nice, flowing, easy day, usually under stress, pressure, things to get things done. And it's no wonder why people burn out and have traumas and have to have time off and change career paths, because generally speaking, our modern day business standards of workplace are just really, they are difficult. And
Depends what work you do.
I guess. But generally speaking, overall, the pressure in the work environment and the way people react to get above everybody else, and it's just not a very cooperative. It's more competitive than cooperative, and that type of scenario does not lead to a healthy situation long term. It's going to get the better of you at some stage. So,
I reckon we're designed to go at 55 kilometres an hour.
yeah.
And we're having to get anywhere, according to culture
Yeah.
we live in, we're having to go at 110 kilometres.
As I say, and I think it's just a matter of evolution. It's going to take us, as Bill keeps on saying, some of us are like 1,000 years ahead of ourselves because we have far more humane and ethical standards, and we're just not there yet, you know. And so it's going to take, it's just a matter of evolution before we get really, really effective as human beings to operate really, really efficiently with as less stress as possible. And it's just a matter of time, basically, and progress.
But that's difficult when certain generations of people have been functioning in a certain way,
Yeah.
and lifestyles and cultures evolve and change, and you're still, I don't want to say dealing with those people, but those people are still in existence in that society.
Yeah.
But they've got their mindset and their ways of how
Well, of course,
they
people
work
have their own
and function
mindset.
and having a life and
Yeah.
you know, dealing with the balance, and then when we reflect and look back on that, we see that as you hear people say, oh, we're not in the dark ages anymore, or we're not in...
I still think we are.
Yeah, I think we are too, especially from some of the things that I've experienced.
Yeah.
And I think with the way we're supposed to be a modern world, or modern people, it hasn't adjusted.
I mean, technology is probably modern, but as far as human function, we're still...
I'm sure 1,000 years from now we'll look on the back of ourselves in a very different way.
Well, I quote you saying that at the end, Bill. That's my third quote for you for tonight.
And sometimes that's the stress that you deal with, because people are saying, well, why are you, why do you have those beliefs, or why do you think your life should be like that? Because I hear people say, not in today's world, it shouldn't be like that.
Yeah.
And sometimes I agree with that comment.
Yeah. Oh, I agree. But as I say, I mean, the general human being, I mean, if it's facing stress, it's not going to be good for it. That's just the natural disposition of the human being.
A certain amount
Yeah.
is probably okay.
Well, it's good for the flight and fight thing, if you, and all that type of idea, which is, but too much is not going to be good for you.
Yeah, I agree with that, but some people like to apply the pressure, and depending, and that's why I said to you, it depends on what work you do.
But how long can they keep that up?
Exactly, and but it's different for everyone else.
Yeah, but I still say, how long can they keep it up?
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, that's why people retire.
Yeah. Or change career.
Yeah.
And one way of thinking about stress is that the amount of stress that you under, like a mathematical formula, is equal to the amount of demands that are placed upon you, divided by your capacity to meet those demands. So as your capacity
And
increases,
your capacity may vary from one person to
it may
another.
and it may vary from time to time. So you can either work by increasing your capacity or decreasing the demands. So you can decrease your demands down to nothing. And then you
Like me.
which is
But then you just become a vegetative other state.
and so maybe that's okay, there's nothing right or wrong there, but the game of life is such that sometimes we like to put demands upon ourselves. It's almost like it's part of a game. Like when you play a game, you put a demand upon yourself.
And if you treat it like a game, that probably helps too.
If you can treat it, if you forget it's a game, and then you get lost in the game and it becomes very dramatic.
That's
it
the
becomes
whole...
painful.
You get very religious and mystical there, Bill, about
Yes,
that. But
that's true. Yes. So either decrease the demands, increase the capacity, or maybe wake up and remember it's all a game.
Anthony,
I think Bill sort of anticipated what I was going to say, that when I was in the workforce, doing a very demanding job with tremendous amount of overtime that I was forced to do, and hating every minute of it, the stress levels were extremely high, and I loathed it. And I decided that I wasn't going to work to live anymore, live to work anymore. Okay, I'm at university again now, and I'm working as hard, but I love every bit of it. Again, I'm playing quite consciously and deliberately, and I love the cut and thrust and the competitiveness, and I'm sort of one of these how shall I say, high achievers, and I love it.
Well, I'm for me, like I'm totally the reverse. I really love the simple things in life, and I love my little place. I love the day. I get real enjoyment out of going shopping for my stuff, and I think, great, it's Tuesday, I'm going shopping today, and get my stuff. And so, but I really enjoy the simple things and the little things because if you enjoy that, you can be very content because your ambitions are not so high and mighty and so far away to be achieved. You can achieve the immediate here and now with the simple things, and it can be very, very satisfying if you take that attitude in life, and you become very grateful day to day as each day goes along. Yeah.
My simple things are gathering degrees.
All right, I'll just bring up the summary quote for this topic. Summary quote: there is no such thing as genetic vulnerability. Genetic sensitivity is the real status quo for encountering a mental illness. Okay, well, we're going to have question time. We've had that question time. Now, so moving on to the next topic.
Were you a perfectionist?
Hey?
Were you a perfectionist before?
Well, I still am.
Okay.
But I
just thought.
No, but I still am. But the thing is, I'm still a perfectionist.
And did that cause some of the...
No. I just really like doing things really well and doing things proper. And I'm not Julian. I think Julian and I are very much like that. We're very much perfectionists, but we're not. It's hard to explain. We're not.
I'm just wondering if that.
We don't. Yeah, we don't see that we don't see that as a disadvantage.
No.
We see it's more. It's like I don't know how to explain it. Do you know?
Well, I actually would call it kind of personal integrity.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Yeah, being proper. Well, that's the word that comes to me.
Yeah, it's proper. It's actually taking responsibility for the world that you're in, not the whole world, the world
And
you're
giving
in,
the best you can.
and your part in that.
Yeah.
I sort of think there's a difference. I'm quite sure there is a difference between doing the best you can and being a perfectionist, which tends to smack of obsessiveness.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't be so quick to label people perfectionistic, rather than wanting to do the best.
Yeah.
You're an excellent scholar, for example, doesn't mean that you're a perfectionist. It doesn't have that kind of psychological connotation of obsessiveness.
Yeah, I don't see it as a disadvantage.
So maybe another word would be better than
Yeah. Okay. Part 8. What causes mental illness and why it is so prevalent in early adulthood? These days, the mental health experts will try to convince and console you that psychosis and other related symptoms are not a result of guilt or other such issues, such as weak personality or sensitivity. However, on a more introspective level and coming from direct experience, the reasons why I believe these illnesses are so prevalent around late teenage years and early adulthood is because we are at a time in our life when we are questioning, in a time in our life when we are trying to work the world out and ourselves too, and how we fit into all of that. We are at a point where we are pondering life and ourselves in a big way. It is at this stage of life when the mind and conscience are in overdrive. But the problem is that we are too young and immature to have a sensible, balanced perspective on life. And as such, conscience may go too far, causing us to analyse ourselves excessively, and this can lead to exaggerated ideas, and then maybe paranoia, and if not released or talked about sensibly at the time, that dwelling can get all out of control, leading to unhealthy ideas, maybe excessive paranoia, then delusion, and maybe eventually a psychotic episode. For me, schizophrenia was indeed like a huge guilt trip. More accurately, apart from the fact that I racked my brains out for over a month trying to work out why the girl I loved so very much was so psychologically cruel and nasty to me at the time, it was also my feelings of guilt resulting from immature thoughts from certain actions in my early adulthood that stirred my conscience so strong that it went off the Richter scale to cause me to have paranoid thoughts. For this reason, I call schizophrenia the juvenile illness, because it always comes down to immature guilt and uninformed conclusions about life and ourselves. Initially, the paranoia was justified and balanced with reason, but there comes a point where conscience becomes so imposing that dwelling upon dwelling takes place. The mind entertains all sorts of scenarios and reasons for how and why things are the way they are, and eventually what was justified and reasonable paranoia takes a heavy spiralling nosedive into excessive and unhealthy levels of interrogation and persecutory ideas, and even delusion, people out to get you, etc. And it is at this point, I believe, when psychosis starts to manifest. As ironic as it seems, with something like the mental illness of schizophrenia, in the early stages, just before the psychosis really takes a hold, the faculty of conscience is actually rather acute, accurate, and active upon the mind. Compunction and introspection are very intense just before the breakdown phase. So you see, schizophrenia is not just a generalised genetic trait from way back in the gene pool from the hunter-gatherer days when paranoia was due to the constant threat of that maybe lion hiding in the bushes waiting to pounce on you for his next meal. No. Mental illness cannot be justified so neatly, simply, and generally. As well as a number of genetic traits, a person's individual character traits and sensitivity has to be accounted, as well as their own unique personal life history and environmental factors, which lead them to have such strong, imposing mind issues. As much as the industry tries to convince us otherwise, hello, there are actually personal reasons and issues that alone can trigger the initial paranoia, not just sleeping genetics waiting for their moment of glory. It does not all come down to genetic predisposition, as these so-called experts presume to confirm to us as the new fad take on mental illness. As ironic as it seems, the faculty of conscience also plays a major part in psychosis and mental illness. So the summary quote for part 8 is, schizophrenia and psychosis is caused by extreme stress and trauma in life that impacts greatly upon the mind of very sensitised individuals. That's pretty much basically the most simplest and accurate way that I can sum up why we experience this in life. Okay. So we're up to part 9, and okay, does the brain generate consciousness, or does the brain just house it personally for individual use and operation? This is where I have my short part 3 for. Now, my question to start with before we start, this is a bit of a controversial question, but I'm just going to put it to you anyway. How many atheists do we have in the room?
Depends how you define the term.
Well, I didn't say how many people believe in God, because that's even more of a group, because you can say what's the definition of God. So that's why I said how many atheists are in the room that don't believe. So,
Would you call a Buddha an atheist?
that's a good question. I would say yes, because he doesn't believe in an eternal presence behind all reality. They believe there's just a nothing, the doctrine of no self. But
Although
it's a very
there's a philosophical answer, I guess.
yeah. I love Buddhism as a practical religion for practical living. I think it's very, very effective. But as far as divine worship, I don't like it. But I'm just getting by here that we have more people who believe in don't.
True believers.
Yeah, I've got the right crowd here for this topic. So, all right, I'll get into it. Does the brain generate consciousness, or does the brain just house it personally for individual use and operation? Okay. At present in our day and age, the standard university degrees taught for psychology and psychiatry are heavily based and biased on the materialist perspective to reality only. For someone who developed believes in the reality of the divine, God, I'm extremely disheartened by how many educated and qualified professional psychiatrists in our modern day do not believe in God, when all the wonders of nature and modern science very much point towards there being a conscious presence to and behind all reality in total. Ever since recovering from my first episode of psychosis, my years afterwards were tenaciously devoted to very deep soul searching and questioning all things about reality and the mind in a very big and profound way. At the time, I was guided by the wisdom of my first psychiatrist, who specialised in transpersonal psychology and psychiatry. And the big question that posed upon my mind was this: is consciousness produced from the brain, or does the brain just house it or hone it for individual use and operation? In other words, is consciousness a product of matter, or is it the other way around? Is matter a product of consciousness? I did not want to believe. I wanted to understand, to know. I would not settle for anything less than what was actual and so about reality and life, beyond all my personal stuff and colourings, especially after what I had experienced so confusingly, very personally so, with psychosis. It was this initial profound question of mine that led me on my journey of discovery about the bigger and broader things to life and reality in total. After further months and years of inquiry and other direct experiences, this is what I've come to discover about the actual answer to that question. And here's the thing, the short thing. We don't have audio, do we?
I hear it in a sound.
Oh no. Oh well. No, that's that.
We'll have to see that.
Can you talk
Yeah, I can pretty much talk to it. In the film here, I pretty much say that consciousness is not just in the brain, but it's everywhere throughout all reality. And the way I justify that perspective is by saying that, look at the atom. Is it random in nature, or is it specific in nature to make up all the elements to make everything we experience in life? You know, like, I think if it has a specific structure and operation to make all this we experience, then there has to be conscious activity at that level in the atom. Now the next question you need to ask yourself, is that conscious activity just located in the atom to make it function so perfectly and specifically to make everything? Or is that conscious activity an all-pervasive field throughout all reality? Now I tend to suggest that because we die and we give up our body, the nature of things is that it all goes back to the one thing. And in that situation, because of that, I believe that that conscious activity is not essentially fragmented individually in every individual aspect of reality. I believe that conscious activity is a non-dual or all-pervasive, boundless field throughout all reality. Now, whether you call that spirit, universal consciousness, God, the divine, whatever, that's how I believe reality operates. And that conscious presence that's throughout everything is responsible for the whole shebang of everything. And it's very, very hard to understand, but the word that comes to mind for that field is unmanifest, which means uncreated. Nothing creates it. It's self-sustaining and eternal, beyond beginning and end. And so what's the scientist who says, I want to know what created God? Who says that? He's
I
the guy in the chair. Is the guy in the chair? The wheelchair?
Yes.
Richard Dawkins.
Richard Dawkins. He says, oh, if there is a God, I want to know who created God.
Yes.
But my question to him is, no, you're asking the wrong question, because nothing creates God, because God is uncreated. It's an unmanifest principle of reality that is always constant and eternal, and it's responsible for absolutely everything known and unknown. So that's the perspective I take, that consciousness is responsible for everything. It's not just in the brain. The brain hones it. It's not being zapped into our brain, like it's out there, it's coming into us. It's all pervasive, and it's just like a wave on the ocean. It's being honed in us individually. But if we were to lose our, as I say, and what happens in a mystical experience is that distinction of the wave is lost, and it all becomes the one thing. All the waves are connected through the ocean, and that's what happens when you have a spiritual or mystical experience. It all feels like the one thing in total, the one whole self. And that's the perspective on reality that I take. And it's very, very sad that not many people get it, because once you do get it, it is really, really great, and it makes you feel really good, and there's something to look forward to, and when you do touch it, it never ever lets you down. It's always there with you 24/7 every day, and it never leaves you. Whether you're aware of it or not in your conscious mind, it's always there with you all the time. So that's what that little. I think I actually did it better than the video.
Replace the old video with the video. That's very good.
Yeah, so that's that. Okay. So that was. But I'm sad that you can't see the last one, because that's the real good one at the end. So, but you'll have to go online and watch that. So, so the summary quote for this topic is: consciousness in essence is subjectively, which means you could say when you think of subjective, personal, but there is also the point that there is a subjectivity that is impersonal, which is everywhere, that is the observer of everything, the eternal witness. And in the non-dual state, the subjective and the objective become no different. It's all the one thing, and it becomes all the one self. And there's no dual distinction, it's all the one self. That's what happens in a non-dual experience, but that's very hard to grasp if you don't really know that area of that perspective on life. But yes, the summary quote is: consciousness in essence is subjectively everywhere and boundless throughout all reality, within and beyond everything, known and unknown. And that's basically the spiritual perspective on reality. Okay, part 10. We are all equal in essence. In essence. We may appear different and varied at the surface, but I think we are all equal in essence. Oops. Okay. Due to how our brain and senses operate, to mention nothing of our own personalised perception on reality also colouring over that, we may appear different and separate at the immediate surface and relative level of reality, but essentially, as I said earlier, we are all made up of the very same stuff of reality: atoms, photons, energy, and above all, the very same boundless life force of all existence as well. And it is that common essence which makes us all perfectly equal and connected in total and throughout it all. As much as we miss this and do not truly understand this greater, impersonal, hidden realm to reality, this is the most important thing of all to remember if we are to respect one another on very equal ground, both in relative life and in human spirit in general. This is the very beautiful divine mystery paradox of all finite reality and life in the boundless eternal oneness of God, just like the individual being a wave on the greater ocean of spirit. So that was a short part, and the summary quote is: no matter how different and separate we may appear at the surface of life, in essence we are all equal and the same in one, greater unified self. Part 11. We're nearly there. Part 11. Collective Genetic Memory. CGM as I call it. At the 25th Anniversary Symposium for the Schizophrenia Fellowship of New South Wales held at the Grand Masonic Centre in Sydney 2010, I was extremely happy and inspired to hear the Fellowship's President at the time, Judge Frank Walker QC, briefly mention to some indirect materialist degree an insight I've also known about for quite a while now, that we as a collective humanity genetically carry the entire history of everything within us, not just our own personal family line stuff, but we all. I thought that was wonderful to hear him imply that so openly in public, that we are all so intimately connected all together so far back as a unified whole, right from the start of it all. Stating the obvious, since we are generally and essentially a human being in makeup to start with, genetically speaking, we also carry that general, genetic and essential history of it all in us to progress us forwards in development as humanity collectively all together. So just consider that one for a moment. Genetically speaking, every individual makeup contains within them the entire history of mankind in total. And myself being a lover of the mystical, I would go even further as far to say that our collective history is not just limited to physical reality, but also the higher and finer levels of reality also, our deepest mystical heritage and essence of all. With that, and in testimony of the spiritual and mystical dimension to reality, there must be an initial conscious universal blueprint to all reality to make up all the specifics in nature. Just for ourselves, to mention nothing of the greater nature and world beyond us, how else do all the cells in our body know where to start and finish for all the details that go into making us up? From the eyes to the eyelids, from the gums to the lips, from the fingers to the nails. There has to be some sort of defining difference to know where one ends and one starts. Now, you could say that just could be a random thing that nature does, but I don't believe that. I believe there has to be some sort of conscious activity to know where to start and finish to make all those different specifics. So, and even more deep and essentially, as I declared in my specific new insight, which was supposed to be in the film, but I explained very well here. How else do all the atoms in existence operate so perfectly and precisely to make up all the wondrous beauty we have in us and around us? Why? Because consciousness is not just limited to brain activity, but rather is an impersonal, subjective field, infinitely everywhere, within, throughout and beyond us all, sustaining everything known and unknown, past and present, and dare I say it, future as well. The eternal presence, as I call it. This knowledge of impersonal consciousness and unified totality has also been directly confirmed for myself through certain mystic experiences I had many years ago in early 1996 when I was 23. Even at the atomic level, there is no clear separating boundary or distinction between our body and everything else around us. Beyond it. Essentially, it is all just one great big universal energy field in total. We are all indeed one, not only physically, but on all levels of reality, mentally, emotionally and spiritually. Not only that, but I also believe, intuit, that genetically we also hold in us the entire potential of all possibilities to make manifest in life. And to express that outwardly and openly, we are only limited by the duration of event, which we call time, the area of amount of space we occupy, and the collaboration we have at the time to make that happen. So in that respect, I do appreciate how we hold everything in us genetically, even to the most subtle, ancient, deepest degree. The next big question we should all be seriously and properly asking ourselves and embarking on as the new major field in mental health and recovery is how we can consciously access this dormant full potential that lies within us for the greater personal benefit for recovery and from our human illnesses. And if we could tap into that consciously, that potential, who knows what we could do. And as I say, the seed is there from the start with all potential to become everything it'll be in life. But I don't think that full potential is just in that seed at that time. It also carries in us genetically all the way through life. So we need, it's probably going to take hundreds of years, but if we can consciously tap into that potential, that full potential, who knows what we could do to heal ourselves and recover. And I think that was, allegorically speaking, that is how Jesus healed, and the masters healed themselves, and that's what that gets down to in that area of life. But as I say, we're not there yet. It'll probably take a long, long time before we get to that, to do that consciously, to activate that potential, not just for us, but for everybody. And as I say, because consciousness, that field is everywhere, that potential can be relayed, not just for us specifically, but in people. And that's what I believe, what they call miracles and healing, etc. So, as much as I greatly admire the works of Carl Jung over the works of Sigmund Freud in most cases, and any day of the week, with the way genetic research is heading, collective genetic memory and the collective subconscious of the human being, both personally and impersonally, are going to become the next big thing in human discovery and for our further best development. So the summary quote is, genetically we carry everything within us, personally and collectively, immediate and ancient. Questions?
I think that's great. I put it like this, that while we can individually, from the illusion, the sense of misinterpreting what seems to be how it is, that puts everything down. Over and above that, I think, I believe, every single human being has a sense of what you've just put to it, okay? Which allows us, you can deny it, you can say, oh no, that's stuff and nonsense, that's fairy story, but I think it actually allows us to sort of recognise the truth when it's put to us. Okay?
Yeah.
That's one instance of it, I can say, yes, that's true.
Yeah,
I
it
feel
rings.
it's true.
It
I know
rings.
it's
It feels
true.
right. It rings.
Okay? It registers, it rings. And I think everybody has.
And I think that register is happening at a deeper essential level that's there in us, and that acknowledgement is coming to our conscious mind, and that's what we all share in common.
Yeah.
And whether we know it or not, we're all in it together.
I would put it as, I put it religiously, like this, that God sees God. Okay?
Namaste.
Yeah, God sees God.
Yeah.
Namaste. But we all have this, and it just takes the moment to actually tap into it.
And that's the beautiful thing, because ultimately it's beyond prejudice. It's there for all of us. It's in us all, whether we know it or not. It doesn't prejudice. We're in it. We can't escape it. It's ever present. I'm rambling. Sorry. Okay. Last chapter. Oh, is there any other questions before we move on? No? Alright guys, you've done well. This is the last topic. Part 12, the most controversial one. the long-enduring relationship between psychotic and mystical experiences in human life. At this final concluding stage of my presentation, this is where I've become more spiritual and mystical about reality, and being a genuine lover and devotee of such, I make no apologies here for taking the time to address the essential and long-enduring relationship between psychosis and mystical experiences in human life and history. To back up my perspective here, I will introduce the famous quote by a leading historian and renowned pathologist, Joseph Campbell. I'll just read it. The shaman is a person, male or female, who in early adolescence underwent a severe psychological crisis, such as today would be called psychosis. This overwhelming psychological experience turns him totally inward. The whole subconscious has opened up, and he has fallen into it. And it has been described many, many times, and occurs all the way from Siberia right through to the Americas, down to Tierra del Fuego. It's a kind of schizophrenic crack-up the shaman experiences. End of quote. For most of us out there, atheist, religious or spiritual, to blindly presume, immediate or otherwise, that a person who has encountered psychosis cannot just as easily, disposition-wise, encounter genuine spiritual, mystical experiences is careless, uninformed, psycho-spiritual prejudice and discrimination of and from our true self, and what is also actually real and possible in life for us all equally to experience ultimate reality. Anyone who accurately studies the long-enduring relationship between psychotic and mystical experiences in our human history, both modern and ancient, will clearly educate you otherwise. Psychosis stems much deeper into, or rather from, the collective subconscious, to be merely written off as nothing more than just personal delusion and hallucination resulting from the surface, immediate tip of the iceberg of physical brain chemistry out of balance, or rather, more accurately, in the acute state of being. Maybe modern Western materialist psychiatry should seriously go back to school and study our shamanic and world wisdom traditions closer for a better, far more accurate definition and diagnosis of what psychosis really is. A deep submergence into the collective subconscious of us all. Personal identification at the deeper, essential, unified level of reality is one of the main reasons why messianic identifications and features are not so uncommon to psychosis and schizophrenia. The Jesus syndrome, as it is classically patronizingly known as, and very badly termed in the mental health industry. So here is my personal realised insight on what hallucination actually is. Hallucination of psychosis is the projecting forth of subconscious impressions and influences out upon the external senses due to heightened genetic sensitivity and overstimulated brain activity. In other words, the dream state coming forth and upon the awake state. And the reason why the experiencer becomes so scared and confused, deluded in such a state, is because they do not have the human spiritual maturity and experience to cope with such overpowering, archaic and abstract impressions coming forth upon the personal surface mind from the deeper collective subconscious. In regards to this insight, in many, if not most cases of psychosis, the person has usually not slept for a long period of time. And because of this acuteness, the dream state clashes upon the awake state as a result of that deprivation. That is why the person experiences such things as hearing, seeing and smelling things out there in objective reality that are not actually there. And if this distinction between the two cannot be accurately discerned and distinguished, experiencing the clashed states together on top of each other can become extremely confusing and even, as is usually the case, very scary and overwhelming to cope with. So as underrated as some of us may think, sleep and getting a good night's worth of it is actually very essential for keeping our conscious states in proper place where they belong, if we are to avoid this clash into psychosis. I've already alluded to how consciousness in essence is totally boundless and everywhere, and is the ultimate essential foundation that holds everything all together. That is the very reason why mystical experiences of union with all reality have graced human beings since the beginning of time immemorial. Always remember our true self, the observer within us all, the silent witness, is always present there in us behind it all, and is always unchanging, no matter how much disruption is occurring at the lower levels of reality and within the individual. Spirit, the mystical, our true self, is the only crown principle of reality that does not corrupt, and does in no way discriminate who is acceptable for mystic union. We only have to be going that way to receive it. Due to our own ignorance and misunderstandings about what is real, only we humans, very sadly, do a very good job of that prejudice. If we are open enough and of a sensitized disposition towards such things, grace can come into our life at any moment to bring us into mystic union, the always essential relationship between our active effort and passive action, which is grace. This is very much the situation with many misdiagnosed psychoses, a premature quickening into the mystic state and identity. In many ways commonly unknown, psychosis is more mystical than delusion than we ever dare to truly care to give the true outspoken credit for. If you are looking for something far more sincere and hopeful concerning mental well-being, I encourage you to study the shamanic and ancient wisdom traditions of our world that have stood the test of time, far long before the very narrow, very limited window of modern Western materialist psychiatry. And also, too, with the way genetic and quantum research is heading, it is only a matter of time when the authenticity of mystical experiences in relation to psychosis will be verified as actual and real spiritually, rather than just mere delusion and hallucination of nothing more than brain chemistry out of balance at the immediate surface of the physical only. Rather, more accurately, this vital relationship will be realized for what it actually is, as the premature awakening and quickening into spiritual mystic identity, which in many cases is too overwhelming for the immature, underdeveloped brain at this stage of human evolution to cope with such greater archaic universal knowledge influxing upon the personal mind from the impersonal. And to give him yet another rap here, my compassionate, insightful friend Bill Guy also has this more holistic and spiritual appreciation to mental illness and psychosis. And I will paraphrase Bill here in my own words. In about 100 years' time from now, we will all look back and say to ourselves, why did we ever treat them so cruelly and inhumanely? If these circumstances were ultimately a negative trait, they would have been culled out of the human gene pool and evolutionary process of life many ages ago. The fact they still remain and persist so commonly across the board implies it is still required in some dormant, underdeveloped way for human evolutionary development and for the ultimate potential for us all. And further from Bill's insight, in my own words, it is these ones who are both cursed and gifted with hyper-conscious sensitivity that are the pioneering ones, now leading and pinching humanity in some gradual, subtle, indirect way forwards into the next stage, field of human evolution, back to our truest state of being of all, spiritual identity and realization for humanity as a whole. So enduring and going through the dark side of nature can actually be a very powerful, somewhat quickening catalyst to bring us into what is real and so. Going through the dark side of nature can also be a positive experience and outcome in the long term. The reason being that when we are stuck there in the darkness of life, it compels us to strive through the horrors of it and to come out the other side into the real light of life again, and go on to realize with far more deeper appreciation, compassion and acceptance the greater, freer nature of reality. Time does heal everything and our deepest wounds of life too, and it is only through enduring life long enough that that is realized in the wisdom of hindsight. Yet in the greater scheme of things, even the darkest shadow is cast by the light, implying that all things, good as well as the bad, are all part of God's creation, known and unknown. Even the dark side of nature has its indirect purposes for our redemption. And in this greater sense, the dark side is only there as an expendable excuse to make us strive for and ultimately realize our true nature, which we all ultimately deserve as our birthright and long for. Well-being, kindness, peace, unity, and love. And lastly, in defense of the spiritual and mystical regarding psychosis and mental health, as much as this knowledge is unaccepted before its time, I very sadly predict it will probably take another good 100 years or so, at least, before such essential integral knowledge of our ancient wisdom traditions becomes mainstream to Western psychiatry. But as far away as that may be, and while we eagerly await for that time to arrive upon us, we also deeply hope very much for far more humane and ethical standards to become so in mental health and modern psychiatry very quickly, here and now, based on true compassion, acceptance, unity, and equality. For further education on this, there are many credible online resources to be found that endorse my perspectives here. Google well. The works of Carl Jung, William James, and Joseph Campbell would be good places to start. So, the summary quote for the final topic for tonight is: we are all mystics in essence, and we are all in it together. So finally tonight, to wrap up, I thought it would be nice to share with you my new advocacy film, Psychosis and the Mystical 101. It goes for 18 minutes, but before we play that, I also have to deeply acknowledge here at the end the number one person in my life that has been there for me through all my dark nights of the soul. My guardian angel in blessed disguise, my wonderful, beautiful mum, Sandra, who has never let me down and has stood by me all the way through it all. You are the best, Mum, and I love you always. Okay, so we'll play the film now to finish up. Thank you very kindly for coming along tonight and allowing me to present my information and knowledge with you all. Thank you.
Leading historian and mythologist Joseph Campbell once stated, "The shaman is the person, male or female, who in early adolescence underwent a severe psychological crisis, such as today would be called psychosis. This overwhelming psychological experience turns him totally inward. The whole subconscious has opened up, and they have fallen into it. And it has been described many, many times and occurs all the way from Siberia right through to the Americas, down to Tierra del Fuego. It's a kind of schizophrenic crack-up the shaman experiences." Contrary to the materialist perspective most generally adopted in modern Western psychiatry, the mental health industry has yet to properly research and investigate the actuality of genuine mystic experiences in relationship to acute psychosis. The accepted definitions of psychotic and mystic experiences are not as differently extreme, black and white, good and bad, as the immediate uneducated eye cares to admit or truly understand and accept. But to the more discerning and refined eye are more greyed together and overlapping in features, and have far more in common than we ever care to admit to out in the open amongst society in general. Being of the mystic temperament myself, I do not pertain that consciousness is merely a product of grey matter, electrolysis of the brain. Rather, I believe that all realities of existence are a product of an all-pervasive, absolute impersonal consciousness of all. To state the ever-present actuality about this being so, how else do all the atoms in existence operate so perfectly and precisely to make up all the wondrous beauty of all nature and manifest reality in and around us every day of our lives, both relatively and in total? Why? Because conscious activity pervades it all, non-locally and boundlessly, beyond anything we have yet to come to properly understand and realise collectively in total. And it is this boundless conscious presence of all that makes for the unity of all life, and allows for the direct mystical experience of conscious unity to be realised by the individual. In this greater way, we are all essentially connected and just as much made up of the same stuff of reality. All of us, the mentally challenged just as equally, beyond any differences of prejudice. In this greater, more hopeful and eternal perspective of reality, the brain is merely the personal transmitter to house, or rather, hone non-local consciousness personally, for individual use and operation, just like a radio receiver. And once the body dies, the individual consciousness returns to the greater source consciousness of all, as if like the air in a balloon returning to the greater when the balloon gives out and explodes. In other mystical terms, the inner and the outer become one and the same, boundless beyond all limits and distinctions. Appreciating and complimenting the insights of Joseph Campbell and other such qualified, insightful past works as William James and Carl Jung, psychosis, in a more humane and dignified definition of it, and more importantly for those who have experienced it, psychosis is actually subconscious stimulus projection, personal and collective, coming forth upon the physical senses. In other words, the dream state coming upon the awake state, which in a clinical definition of it is what hallucination really is, hearing and seeing things out from the mind that are not actually there in objective reality. So if one is deprived of sleep for a long period of time, a clash between the dream state and the awake state will eventually occur, seeing, hearing and smelling things upon the senses that are not actually there. This is what psychosis equals and what hallucination is in a nutshell. Just as much as acute chemical reactions and stimulus happening in the brain. Unless one is extremely discerning and able to step back into the witness state of observation, it can become extremely difficult and confusing for the experiencer to discern between the subconscious state conflicting upon the awake state. In many ways, generally speaking, psychosis is nothing more than extreme information overload, both inner and outer, subjective and objective, subconscious and conscious, and sometimes all together at once. As a result of this acute overload, the experiencer becomes very confused, deluded, bad word, about it all, and in many ways it is very scary and overwhelming, a revved up rush, and far too much to contend with at any one time. To use a simple analogy, it is like a 60-watt light bulb being plugged into a 60,000-watt socket. Extreme information overload is what occurs upon the brain, which at this current stage of human evolution is not fully evolved or advanced enough to cope with such collective, unified information all at once. Personal identification at this deeper collective, subconscious level of the universal and impersonal mind is one of the reasons why messianic identifications are not so uncommon in this excessive state of being, the Jesus syndrome, as it is very badly termed in modern Western materialist psychiatry. It will probably take another good 2,000 years at least before the human brain develops to a stage, or rather state of mind and being, before it will be in a position to normally and stably cope with the deeper, non-dual, unified capacity upon it, or rather, more accurately, surrendered to the mystical state of complete unity as a constant in everyday human life. Subconsciously speaking, the greater collective subconscious mind is all to do with the combined history of humanity in total, along with the deeper archaic symbolisms associated with that. And as far as genetic memory is concerned, memory in this genetic way applies collectively, just as much as individually. Not only is our personal family line history of heredity firmly embedded and established in our genes' memory within us, but as we are also a general human being in basic essential makeup and structure to start with, in foundation we just as much carry the entire genetic memory of humanity in total within us also, the good and the bad, right back to the beginning of time. And in many real ways, this deeper collective unified genetic memory is very much expressed, and sometimes suppressed, within us via the collective subconscious mind, universally and equally within us all. Just as Carl Jung advocated, the true, deeper subconscious mind is not just personal and of the individual displaced alone, but rather collectively of humanity in total, and of complete potential in us all. So in truth, psychosis has nothing to do with evil spirits taking over the individual's mind. No. Rather, it is all to do with the personal mind not being able to cope with the excessive and unavoidable plunge into the deeper end of the greater collective subconscious mind. From what has been collectively accounted by many who have experienced both psychosis and the mystical, there is actually no dark side to our truer, deeper essence and spirit, and the spiritual realms of reality, since spirit is always true and pure, and is the only realm of existence that is not prone to corruption of the temporal and finite. The dark side of nature is all to do with the areas of mind, both personal and collective. As it has been declared by the wise and holy of all our spiritual traditions, all ignorance is of the mind alone. In other words, the mind does not have the answers to life, since it is always questioning everything about reality and trying to work it out. By its very nature, the mind is nothing more than just one big questioning machine. It does not hold the answers to life. Via the subconscious, all the answers to life and existence reside in the true deeper self of us all, the unmanifest infinite potential in which we all equally share, beyond all relative difference and limitations. This is the mystical relationship between lower self and higher self, life's journey and conscious unfolding process from our ego state back into our true, essential, unified state of being, self-actualization and realization. So, if anything, actual insanity and psychopathic tendencies is when a person is very stable in mind and yet still very consciously and premeditatively takes a personal inclination and bent to dark tendencies and qualities of nature, which in truth is actually totally against the natural flow of life and human evolution, and further, complete profanation against the greater good, ethical and spiritual ideal of all. For the good well-being of the individual and the greater community at large, this dark, extreme tendencies of mind frame are to be very much avoided if we are to flourish successfully and harmoniously, all together, collectively and generally. The mystical state of mind and being, both earthly and spiritually, is considered by most of our world religious traditions to be the original and refined, mature state of the human being. Considering the many profound, unripe, quickened, collective subconscious things that human beings have experienced in the psychotic state over the ages of humanity, it is only a matter of time and endurance of evolution when the human brain has matured enough to properly handle the deeper, quickened, collective subconscious state experienced in psychosis to a normal and manageable degree, to understand and assimilate such profound archaic information properly and accurately, which ultimately leads deeper into the unified state of the human psyche, the subconscious doorway into our mystical and spiritual origins universally. In this deeper esoteric understanding, people in this situation of life now with psychosis are the premature and leading pioneers of the mind. It is these ones who are the future mystics and shamans of humanity. In short and somewhat controversially, psychosis is the future, undeveloped mind of humanity. Quite ironic, really, when considering psychology was originally and essentially the study and understanding of the human psyche and spirit. Having revealed this here, it is reasonable to appreciate that the state of psychosis is a premature, quickened and unripe state of the mystical state, and it is only a matter of time when the mind has evolved and matured enough to normally function universally, just as well as individually. This is the spiritual paradox of life, and the greater mysteries of relationship between the individual and the universal, the relative and the absolute, the temporal and the eternal, as one greater unified self of all. To use a very appropriate analogy, just as the wave is never separate from the greater ocean and all other waves via that, nor is the individual consciousness separate from the universal divine consciousness. As it has been declared in Western scripture since ages past, for in him we live and move and have our being. In other simpler terms, the all is far eternally greater than the sum of all the parts. Consciousness is not just in the head. It is eternally everywhere and ever present. How else could all the atoms in existence operate so perfectly and precisely to arrange and present everything we experience in the world around us every day of our lives? The complex arrangements of the atom to build all manifest reality are certainly not random, for if they were, nature would have no form or structure to it. If the atom were a random function, reality at best would be extremely chaotic, unreliable, abstract, and unable to keep any purposeful form or function. It wouldn't even be that, for there would be no atomic matrix order to form any structure of anything in the first place. The fact the atomic structures of reality operate so precisely and accurately to make all the wondrous beauty we have in us and around us is testimony that conscious activity is operating in and behind everything, everywhere, known and unknown. If there was no conscious activity there at the atomic level and deeper levels of reality, the atoms would not even hold structurally. And this would mean that we would not have any natural order or beauty in nature for us here at the sensory level. Our body would have no definition or structure. Even our personal reality would have no definition or dimension to it, let alone objective reality. If there was no conscious activity in essence, then there would not be any structure to reality in general to start with. If that were so, if reality, both microcosm and macrocosm, were based on docile, unpredictable randomness. As obvious as we miss the obvious, this is not the nature of the universe. There is precise, conscious order throughout it all, and this conscious presence, for a better word, is not just located singularly in every atomic unit, but rather is a boundless, undivided, non-local field, infinitely, eternally everywhere, sustaining everything, known and unknown. As it is written, for in him we live and move and have our being. So indeed, yes, God is actually and very much everywhere and ever present, with and in us all, every day of our lives. And when we are open and willing to receive that consciously, it is that presence that makes such an experience of mystic union with all reality possible, because of its very nature being boundless, infinite and eternal, within, throughout and beyond everything, everywhere, holding everything all together. That presence is in you, it is in me, it is in the chair you are sitting on, in the very space before you there, in the building, in the cars outside, in the trees, the land, the earth, the sky, even in space, the universe, and infinitely beyond. We are all very much all together as one big universal family in the eternal presence.